Hola, Vincenzo.
Hola, Lali. Welcome back to the podcast today. You had a nice special guest on the show that we're going to talk about, huh?
I'm so excited. So, you're a big IndyCar fan when you have to go through all your shirts that are IndyCar merch and be like, which one should I wear for the podcast? And then I finally picked this one, but then I realized that there was another even more special shirt that I could wear
Hmm.
when I spoke with our guest. So why don't you tell people why I might be so excited about today's episode?
Well, I think there's a few reasons why you're excited. So this guest is hails. I believe he hails from the same city you are living in currently. I won't say you're
Ye-
from, but living in.
Certainly not from. Can you remind the people where I'm from, please?
Um, is it some country in South America? Maybe
Yeah, perhaps in the north.
Colombia.
Yes. Bing, bing, bing. Okay.
Ding, ding, ding.
I
1,000 points
I
for Vincenzo.
however, I live in Toronto, you are correct, and our guest is also from Toronto.
So there's the first clue. This guest is from Toronto. This guest is a multiple IndyCar race winner. This
Correct.
guest is an Indy 500 pole sitter.
Super correct.
This guest was a runner-up in Dancing with the Stars.
Ding, ding, ding.
He's a broadcaster and
Correct.
pundit.
Correct.
You might know him from F1 TV.
You may. Or you might know him from the Fox booth
True.
calling he calls IndyCar races as well.
And I think he's still an active driver in IMSA, right?
He does the endurance races in IMSA, yeah. He was
Has a
racing the
great
Lambo.
voice. Great voice.
He has a great voice. He's a handsome man as well.
You might know him as the mayor of Hinchtown.
Toronto's very own James Hinchcliffe.
So before we get into the show, I want to ask you a couple things about it because it was an
Okay.
exciting listen. Lolly recorded last week. The beauty of the duo here is that sometimes we have to do things without the other, and she had I think it was her pleasure to interview James.
Listen, James didn't seem too bored, so I don't know. I think it was a mutual kind of thing.
How many times did you tell him you were from Colombia that I had to cut out?
It actually didn't come up until he brought up a very famous Colombian race car driver that people may know as Juan Pablo Montoya. And then how could I not
How
mention
could you
that I'm
not?
from
You took the bait. I'm sure you took the bait and ran with that.
I was like, just so you know, I am from Colombia. And then yeah, I had to. Yeah.
Uh, couple things I liked about the show, and obviously, listeners, you'll hear it shortly, but he talks about race car driver mindset, and I won't spoil it for anybody what he talks about specifically, but that was one of the major topics that I thought was really, really interesting. How he just called it out. Um, how race car drivers, I think it was really your question about race car drivers just being different, maybe missing a screw or two, and he definitely gave the answer that I thought was perfect. The other thing that was interesting, you guys went down this tangent about the addiction to racing and what is it about racing that's the addiction. And I think he said something that was, I don't know, just it was great. He said, I think every driver at their core is a competitor and they're addicted to winning, or the feeling of winning is what they're addicted to, he said specifically. And he said that he loves doing things that humans are not supposed to do. Humans are not supposed to go 200 miles an hour, is what he said. And I'm thinking most people are are happy never going, over the speed limit. Never mind 234 miles per hour around, an oval. Um, so that was really interesting. And then there's a lot of personal chatter between the two of you as well that I think people will find interesting. But I'm curious. I want to hear what your not favorite part. What struck you the most? Because you know a lot about Hinch, and you know a lot about IndyCar. What struck you the most surprising? What was the most surprising thing you learned from this recording?
Something that stuck with me was that he said something about how a driver can end their career as a very well-rounded person because they have to do so much. They have to look for sponsors. So they're good at marketing themselves.
Mm,
They do a lot of events. They do a lot of public speaking. They're in a team, so they know about teamwork. So he was like, a driver can come out of a racing career as a really well-rounded business person,
yeah.
and I'd never even thought about that or considered it, so I thought that was really interesting, and also what I found interesting is how early on in his career, he had already started thinking about the
Mm.
next thing, about how to achieve financial and business longevity after racing, and he said that that started with his first paycheck. I was really surprised about that, so those were 2 things. Because other the racing stuff, I knew his career so well, but those were 2 of the things that really I'd never considered, and I thought that was quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I think there's such a parallel between that aspect of what James said and our previous guest, which F1 Elvis, Mark Priestley. I mean, he's made an entire career of it. He was a mechanic in the pit for McLaren, and he's taking what he learned from the pit lane. I mean, his book is literally called Pit Lane Lessons, his new book, and he gives lessons from being on a team and how teams operate. And there's so many parallels that businesses, companies, individuals can take from how a team operates, specifically a race team and a pit crew, how they operate, because things are moving so quickly, literally the business of speed, that, you know, it is a perfect parallel to all things business. So if you're not thinking about the next thing and business and how you can translate that into speaking or consulting or, whatever it might be for you, James has a different direction right now, but he can take it into so many different directions. He's still freaking young. Um, it's just really cool. So I really enjoyed this episode. Did you have any last thoughts before we let the listeners actually hear it?
No, I'm just really excited for people to hear this interview. He's such a great human. He's just a great, asset to the world of racing, and I'm so glad that the F1 people have, gotten to know him and fall in love with him, and I'm really excited for people to hear the interview.
Without further ado, Lolly and James Hinchcliffe in conversation. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Business of Speed podcast. Hinchcliffe, the mayor of Hinchtown in the house. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing well, actually quite excited because as you see, if you're watching us, you can see that we're both in Toronto Blue Jays gear because we're having a phenomenal World Series.
We sure are. It's going back home, and it's going to be pretty intense.
It's been intense and it's going to be more intense, but I think this is our year. So I wanted to tell you just to start that once upon a blue moon, I watched an IndyCar race in Toronto, sat next to your parents in an enormous coincidence.
No
I was
way.
sitting next they were in the first of all, they were in the crowd, which I thought was amazing, and there's this lovely lady with this blonde hair, and she says, "Oh, who are you rooting for?" And I said, "Well, it'd be great if Hinchcliffe could win his home race." And she just nonchalantly says, "That's my son." No, I'm like, "Ha ha," and she's like, "No, no, no, that's my son. This is my husband. These are our friends, and we're just watching it here in the crowd with them."
That's so funny. That's so funny. Yeah,
Really,
they
really.
uh, they always loved being in the action. So it was yeah, no surprise to hear that story.
I can attest to that they were not in fancy hospitality. They were in the thick of the action with the fans. It was great to see. I want to dive into something right away that has always intrigued me about professional race car drivers. And I've never gotten the chance to sit with one like you today. So I wanted to ask you about your mindset and what I think is almost like a sociopathic mindset that race car drivers have in that you experience really enormous highs in racing, but there's also tremendous lows, and you've experienced some awful tragedies. You've seen people that you love and admire, Greg Moore, Justin Wilson, Dan Weldon, the accident of your good friend Robert Wickens. You yourself had a horrific accident. You almost lost your life. But then somehow you come back to the racetrack and you say, "Strap me in, Bob, I'm going racing." What is it that you have that I don't, that permits that?
I think it's not something that I have that you don't, it's the other way around. I think drivers don't have the self-preservation gene that most human beings are born with. You know, your brain is wired that if you touch something hot, it burns you, you don't like it, you stay away from things that are hot, you know not to touch them anymore. You would think that you strap into a race car, something goes wrong, you hurt yourself, your brain would say, "Oh, we're not going to do that anymore." We just don't have that. It allows us to have these moments because in any career, as you come up through the ranks, as you experience different levels of speed and all the rest of it, there are going to be incidents, there are going to be accidents. It's part of being a driver. Gilles Villeneuve's famous quote, right, is you don't know the limit until you've gone past it. Sorry, that's Mario Andretti. And so it's no, that is Gilles. Mario was if you feel like you're on the or if you feel like you're under control, you're not going fast enough.
There,
Anyway,
that's Mario,
that's
yeah,
Mario.
that's
Yeah,
Mario.
yeah. Gilles was, if you can't find a limit till you go past it. So accidents and incidents are inherently part of it. And obviously, cars are a lot safer now than they used to be, but you certainly hope that you're not going to get injured at any point. But if you do, I mean, I've never met a driver that didn't want to immediately get back into a race car. I've never met a professional racer that let an injury. I mean, look at you just said Zanardi. Look at Zanardi. He lost both his legs and nearly his life and wanted to get back into a race car. Robbie Wickens was, paralyzed and designed his own hand controls to get back into a race car.
It's banana really, to the normal person, it's bananas.
For
It's
sure,
actually
it
bana
is. We're
yeah.
nuts. I acknowledge
You're
that.
nuts. Do you think is the addiction to adrenaline, is it the addiction to control? You're like, it's a bit of a god complex, like, I am controlling 700 to 1,000 horsepower, depending on the series, around a track at speed, nailing it. There are few humans on Earth who can do this. Is that the what is the addiction? Adrenaline, control, both?
I do think there is an element of what makes driving race cars so appealing is that you're taking this inanimate object and essentially breathing life into it. That you and the car have this symbiotic relationship and feeling on the edge with the machine is such an incredible feeling. I imagine it's what fighter pilots feel like when they're flying their jets, same kind of thing. I think you do get addicted to that a little bit. But at the same time, I think at their core, every driver is a competitor, and I think that competitive nature in you is a big part of what fuels you to keep doing that. The feeling of winning, I think, is what people are addicted to. The driving is an awesome feeling, and if you were just told you were going to drive around by yourself all day every day, it'd be fun. But at some point, it's the competition and it's being the best on a day. I think that really fuels drivers.
Does that bravery, so to speak, does that translate for you personally off the track? Would you skydive, jump off a cliff? Are you brave in risky business decisions? Like, I'm curious if it translates.
I think that's different for every person. That one I don't think is as clear cut. I never really considered myself an adrenaline junkie, but then my wife kind of listed off a few things that I enjoy doing. And so I have to admit that, yes, there's probably an element of that. I think for me, it was always when I look back on things and things that I enjoy, for me, I love doing things that humans aren't supposed to do. Right? Humans aren't supposed to go 200 miles an hour. That's not what we were built for. I love scuba diving. Humans aren't supposed to exist under the water. I am fascinated by space. I would kill to go to space. You're not supposed to be up there. So I do have a little bit of this complex of wanting to do things that you're not supposed to be able to do.
I think you're in denial. You are an adrenaline junkie. I'm sorry. I'm with Rebecca on this one. You are for
I
sure.
I did go skydiving once, but I promised I would never do it again.
So I want to talk a little bit about the beginning of your career. You were gifted a cart by your parents. You're 9 years old, and you start racing. When's the tipping point when you yourself or as a family you're like, I'm pretty elite at this. Like I'm a standout. I should follow this path, or this is something I'd like to follow. When does that start happening?
So kind of between 14, 15. At 14, I had a guy kind of approach my dad and I saying, "Hey, you're doing well in karting in Canada. You should probably be driving on kind of the North American tour." And up to that point, being a professional driver was never really the goal because at 9, 10, 11, I knew that wasn't a real job. Like no one actually got to do that, right? And at that point, he goes, "No, this is all the kids that want to be professional drivers, and I think you could compete with them." So we started doing that for a year, and at the end of that year, I got invited to go do my first car race. And I was 15. I was actually not legally allowed to do it, but I got some kind of special permission slash they turned look the other way. And, I was racing against kids that were 18, 19, had been racing cars, wanted to be professional drivers. And in my first weekend, I won. And that was kind of the moment where I thought, okay, so now I've done the karting thing and someone said you should do this. And then I tried the car thing and that's gone okay the first crack at it. So yeah, why don't we see how far we can take this? And that's kind of when my mindset switched and my mom, dad, and I sort of made the decision, yeah, we're gonna go for it.
And you start in most of your career, your feeder series were all in North America. Was IndyCar always the ultimate goal? Did you ever think of F1? Because you're Canadian, we have a home race, you have the Villeneuves that you mentioned earlier. What was the goal at that time?
It's funny. The goal was IndyCar because even though we had the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal, we had the IndyCar race in Toronto, and
Yeah.
that's where I grew up. And so I grew up chasing Mario Andretti and Michael Andretti around for their autographs and Bobby Rahal and all those guys. So for me, that was what I knew. That's what I knew the best, and that's kind of what I wanted. At that time, I was a fan of Formula One. My dad was from England, so he was an F1 fan. So we watched it and I enjoyed it, but I just had more of a connection to IndyCar, and so I had one opportunity to kinda go to Europe when I was 17 or 18, and that would have been that was kinda that fork in the road moment of, which career path do I really wanna try to pursue, and for a bunch of different reasons, my parents and I decided that staying in North America made the most sense for us, and that was kind of it. Never really thought about going over to Europe again.
Well, it's funny because life is a little bit interesting in that now you are in F1
Yeah.
in your own way, um, obviously as a presenter, commentator, and I'd like to know a little bit about that. When you first arrived in the paddock, and here's James Hinchcliffe, he's gonna speak. How were you received? Did people know who you were? Did the other drivers know who you were? Was there a level of respect? Because I find all the time because I'm an enormous IndyCar fan, and when I speak of it, people are like, "Oh, it's like, sometimes it's a little bit, you've probably gotten this reaction." And people say, "Oh, it's just boring. All they do is go in circles." I'll allow you to correct that misinformation in a moment because it's an enormous misinformation that's out there. So I'd like to know, after you correct why it's not just in circles, tell us how you were received in the paddock initially.
Yeah, so what's cool about IndyCar is we race on all types of tracks. So we do permanent road courses, temporary street circuits, and then we do short ovals, super speedways, and it's the diversity in racetracks I think that really makes IndyCar, so exciting and such a challenge. And so yeah, when you get into the paddock, it's interesting because F1 is obviously a very big deal. There's a lot of people involved, and I was kind of the new guy on the block to a lot of people. But if anything, I would say it was the drivers that were kind of the most welcoming because there is still a tremendous level of respect between drivers in different series. Certainly from the IndyCar side going the F1 way, but then also the F1 side coming this way because you had guys like Alonso come over and do it and then report back and say, hey, this is actually pretty hard. And oval racing's not as easy as going flat and turning left. And I think that helps a lot of drivers, guys like Lando grew up racing with Colton Herta when he was over in the US, or sorry, over in Europe. Connor Daly was over in Europe, and so Joseph Newgarden was over in Europe. So a lot of these guys have some connection. They follow the sport. A lot of them love the racing in IndyCar and openly admit they're like, "Hey man, I'm not gonna do ovals. I'm not willing to do what you guys do." And I think that comes with a kind of a level of mutual respect, which is cool.
People often ask me, so what's the difference between like an IndyCar driver and an F1 driver? And I go, in terms of ability, eliteness, they're the same. But I always say, and perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, I always say that, however, an IndyCar driver would beat an F1 driver at an arm wrestle because they don't have power steering, so their arms are stronger.
That is probably pretty accurate. That is probably pretty accurate. Yeah, the physicality of an Indy car is a little bit different than an F1 car.
So to all the people throughout the years that I've said that to, now we have proof that I was
Yeah.
correct in
Yep.
saying that an IndyCar driver will beat an F1 driver in an arm wrestle. And maybe we can prove that one day, James. We'll find in the time.
I'll go through the paddock and see if we can I'll take them
Oh
all
my
on,
gosh, that
see
would be
yeah.
spectacular. Business of Speed will be in Las Vegas for the Grand Prix, so maybe we'll figure something out then.
Perfect.
You mentioned Connor Daly, so something I'd like to ask you is, I asked Connor once upon a time who he thought was the driver that he ever raced against that had the most natural ability. So we're not talking who won the most hardware because we know that that's dependent on opportunity, right?
Hmm.
If you don't get the right ride, you're not going to get the most hardware. I'm not going to tell you who he said right now. I'd like to ask you the same question, and then I'll tell you who he said.
That is a really, really difficult question to answer because obviously we've both been lucky enough to race against a lot of tremendous talents. I look at a guy like Scott Dixon because he's obviously incredibly fast. There's not really an area of the game he's not good at, and he's been able to be consistently good. So you talk about opportunity, fine, but he has created that opportunity time and time again. You're not a six-time champion without that.
And as
Obviously,
good in other forms of motorsport as well, Scott.
exactly right. You put him in any kind of car, GT cars, prototypes, he's incredibly competitive. What Pelot's doing right now is unbelievable. I think back to my 2007 Formula Atlantic teammate, Rafa Matos,
Rafa, yeah.
and when you're talking about just pure talent, like you give him a race car and just say all you have to do is drive it as fast as possible. I don't know there was a guy that I ever certainly was teammates with. It's hard to do those accurate judgments on people you're
Of
not,
course.
but in terms of teammates that I've had, guys that just I could not do what he could do with that exact car on that exact moment. Rafa was unbelievable in terms of just pure natural ability.
I love that. So Connor said Stoffel Van Dorn.
No way.
He said that that's the most naturally gifted guy he'd ever race again in his entire career. I
Yeah,
thought that was a very interesting answer, and it goes to show you how this is a guy who made it to F1 who had but never had the right ride. Things never quite clicked for him. So
right.
it doesn't matter how much talent you have if the circumstances don't align for you in racing.
Racing's a dumb sport in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons, and that's one of them. I'm gonna throw Montoya in the mix too, because we did get to race together, and that guy is one of the most naturally talented drivers that's
Well,
ever
I'm
lived.
very glad you mentioned Juan Pablo Montoya because you don't know this. I am from Colombia.
Ah, okay, okay.
So Juan Pablo's an idol in our
Is a
country.
hero. Yeah, yeah.
He's a big, big hero. So I tend to agree with you that that is another man like a Mario Andretti. You can
Mhm.
put him in a tractor and he'll
Yeah,
win
yeah.
the tractor race.
Right.
Anything. He's just incredibly competitive. I'm going to pivot a little bit here. So you're racing, you love it, you have these opportunities. At what point in your career do you start thinking, okay, I need to start planning for my next chapter after racing. I need to create a career for myself, some financial success outside of the cockpit. Is that something always in the back of your mind, or is it just something that just spontaneously happens when you're like, oh, I'm not getting a ride easily for next year?
No, the day I got my first paycheck, I think, is when I started worrying about the next chapter because racing is such a fickle business, and I was always kind of cognizant of the fact that it could stop tomorrow, right? You have very little control over your future as a driver and things can happen. You can get injured, whatever things happen. And so I was always kind of terrified of how life would continue post driving, even having no idea when that was going to happen. So I always sort of had an eye to, being, first of all, just financially responsible, but then also looking for kind of business opportunities when I was still, an active IndyCar driver and things that I could do sort of passively while I was focused on racing, but could take more of a role in afterwards. And the TV thing, honestly, was something I had dipped my toe in before I even got to IndyCar and was always sort of told like, "Hey man, you should just keep a finger on that and just kind of stay in touch with the TV world because that could be something good for you, when you decide to stop." And sure enough, when I sort of made that decision to step back from IndyCar, I made one phone call and an offer was there and it kind of made that transition very easy. I was very lucky in that sense.
It's amazing. Have you ever considered, Mark Webber manages Oscar Piastri, Fernando manages Bortoleto. Have you ever considered being a driver's manager?
I have, yeah. I do have I'm a partner in a small management company and we kind of help young drivers in North America navigate some of the stresses and some of the challenges of getting up into top level motorsports. But yeah, more recently, there's been some interesting conversations about maybe being involved in drivers' careers that are kind of already at the high level. It's something I could see myself getting into in the future for sure.
I think so too. Not only because I think you bring this calming presence about you, and you could talk sense into someone, but also you know it so well, and now you know the other side on the other side of the pond, so you could really help someone That'd be great. You're a supremely, supremely busy man. So for just to remind people, he's calling races for IndyCar in the booth for Fox. You're on F1 TV, you're part of that team. And I don't want to clarify this. You are not retired from racing. You just raced all the IMSA endurance races with Faf in the Lambo. So it's kind of banana. So maybe talk to us a little bit of what life hacks, routines can you share that are like pivotal to your success? Because not only are you changing time zones regularly, you're changing job descriptions regularly. That is not so common. So tell us
Right.
how you manage that.
Wow. Well, look, I think being a professional racing driver, in IndyCar, in F1, in NASCAR, in these high levels of the sport, you learn to be a little bit of a chameleon, right? Your main job is to be a driver, but you're also a spokesperson. Sometimes you have to act in commercials. Sometimes you have to give speeches to rooms of sponsored guests and things like that. You have an interesting sort of world. You're not just solely focused on the one thing. It's your primary focus, but you do kind of have to be at least competent in the other
Tangentially
areas.
involved in other
Right.
things.
Exactly. You learn a lot about the marketing side of motorsports because to get to the top, you probably had to raise sponsorship and you understand then how businesses work. And I think drivers can kind of come out of a career in racing fairly well rounded in a lot of different areas. And so, yeah, for me, it's preparation, honestly. Whatever job I'm going into that week, I spend all that week preparing for that job. And, during the IndyCar schedule, it's fairly easy because it's mostly IndyCar all in a row. And then the F1 stuff, it's a little different because I sort of bounce around to different roles on the F1 side with those guys, whether it's pundit, sometimes commentator, sometimes lead presenter now. So
Yeah.
that's an ever evolving sort of thing. And then obviously when I'm racing back in IMSA, it's full on to the racing thing. But I plan my sleep very, very precisely, and that's
I
a
was
very
wondering
important
about
part of it.
that. Do you
Yeah,
pre-plan the time zone where you're headed in and you start sort of planning that way?
absolutely, absolutely. And that's something I learned the hard way, kind of after my first year or two of doing this. But for Vegas, for example, you said you're going there. I'll be going there the Monday before. I start kind of staying up an hour later every night and going to and trying to wake up an hour later. And my wife's great about it. Like she'll go to bed at a normal time, and I'll stay up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because I know that's what my work day is going to be in a week's time. And if you don't get your body there and prepare to do it, it can be tough. One of the biggest ones I just did was coming back from Singapore, which is a 12-hour time difference to the Eastern US, and I had to go straight to Petit Le Mans race, and I needed to be rested. And so the minute the checkered flag fell in Singapore, I start working on getting my body back to the right time zone, and it's a huge part of it for sure.
That's so nice that you can do that because not everybody can do that.
For
It's
sure.
very complicated. But I guess your hack of starting early, the week you're doing something, focus on that week, start getting into the time zone. So I'm rubbing down here. I want to ask you a few final questions. So I have very strong opinions about certain rules in F1. One that I'll tangentially mention, and I can't speak of it too much because I might get worked up here, is, for instance, changing tires during a red flag,
Oh, it's the worst.
which has led to a horrible debacle that may have happened at some point in the end of 2021. So I'd like to ask you, what one rule in F1 would you like to change and bring in an IndyCar rule, and vice versa? What F1 rule would you bring over to IndyCar?
Honestly, like without you saying that, the rule I hate the most in F1 is the red flag tire rule. That is probably the first thing that I would change. It doesn't happen that often, but it just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So I would get rid of that in a second. And man, what rules would I bring over?
Do you like, for instance, blue flags? Do you think IndyCar's fine without blue flags, or would you like blue flags in IndyCar?
I think there's a place for blue flags in IndyCar. I really do. I get the argument for not doing it. The racing's a little bit different, so full course cautions can, help you out. But at the end of the day, if you've gone a lap down, you've gone a lap down for a reason. And sometimes it's your day, sometimes it's your not. It's not. And so what I think IndyCar does well is it used to be that once you were lapped down to the leader, then you would get the blue flag and everyone else would kind of get a free pass to go buy a lap car. And they changed it to now you have to be a lap down to the entire field because it used to be essentially a disadvantage to be the leader and come across a lap car first. So I think I think just kind of pivoting to a more standard blue flag setup would make the racing at the front a little bit better and not compromise races quite the same way. So that could be interesting. If it was something I could bring from IndyCar to F1, it'd be refueling. I'd bring refueling back because
Interesting,
I
okay.
think, we've talked about it a lot the last 2 years, but we've really spent the last 5 years plus trying to figure out how to make sure these races aren't one-stoppers, right? And it's all gone on Pirelli, it's all gone on the tire manufacturer. You look at the Mexico City race, it was brilliant because it was a multiple strategy race. Most races aren't. If you have fuel stops, that becomes a moot point. I mean, there are going to be a plethora of strategies that you can employ. And so it's never going to happen for all the money saving and net zero carbon saving issues. But that's one area where I think F1 sort of pivoted the wrong direction.
Remember those days when Michael and Rubens, and you never knew how much fuel a car started with, so you never
Right.
it added such a great dynamic because is he heavy? Is he light? Like, it really does add a lot of dynamicism to the racing, so I tend to agree with you, but unfortunately, we know that it won't happen. You have raced everywhere on Earth. You recently got to race the Haas car, which is probably a life treat for you. So, tell us about that quickly, the experience about the Haas, and was it everything you ever hoped for?
Yeah, incredible opportunity to get to do some laps in a modern Formula One car, and can't thank the team enough for it. And it was at an amazing track, Mugello in Italy, which is one of the coolest places to go drive an open wheel car. And yes, it met and exceeded all expectations. That it is such an incredible machine, and it's really impressive. And gives you a whole new perspective, a whole new appreciation, even for someone that had a high level of appreciation for what Formula One drivers do. It raised it up even another level for sure. It was amazing.
What's your favorite track on Earth to race at?
So to race at is probably, Road America.
It
That
loves
one,
Road America.
yeah, it's just a classic old school road course. It's got high speed, low speed, long straights, big brake zones, technical sections. It's got it all. I love that place.
Amazing. And then final question, who's gonna win the Drivers' Championship? This is an easy one.
Oh, it's so difficult. I've got a great argument for all 3 of them. I really do. Man, it changes every week, 2 months ago, you would have said it was a slam dunk for Oscar, and then Max started turning it up, and you thought, "Oh my god, is Max really gonna do this?" Then you look at a weekend like Mexico City, and the fact that Lando's beaten Oscar for 5 straight weekends now, it's like, "Oh, is momentum back on Lando's side?" I can't answer that question. I honestly can't. I
You
have
know what it's reminiscent of, James? When Lewis and
it's
Fernando were at
2007.
McLaren,
Yeah.
and there comes Kimi.
Yeah, exactly. We did a whole piece on that before the race in Mexico.
Oh, I missed it, actually, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I arrived at this conclusion by myself, as they say.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that it's repeating itself, and there comes Max, just do 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 do, Max Verstappen. I'm with you. I can't quite pick. I know who maybe I'm not going to say here, but who I would prefer to win. But it's very very hard to tell you where I'd put my money.
Yeah, this is why I don't gamble on sports because anything can happen.
It's a losing proposition. Thank you so much, James Hinchcliffe, for joining us today on the Business of Speed podcast. Let's hope that the next time we meet, we can celebrate a World Series victory for
Yes,
Toronto,
fingers
for our home
crossed,
team.
fingers crossed.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on.